you're good on video and audio. I
Rad.
think right now we're checking to see Jan if we could possibly do a recording. That'd be great. If not, let's go from there. Awesome. Thank you.
It's been recorded, Andrew.
There we go. Perfect. Thanks. Keep going, bud.
All right. Yeah. So when it comes to game design, there's no real limit to what you're limited to your imagination mostly. Today's world of game design, there's like a million ways to make a game on any kind of platform. Now, when I say platform, it could be anything from a board game to a computer game to a mobile game to something that's projected on a wall. I mean, the whole premise for a game is that it's something that's repetitive and it's fun. And there's obviously got to be some kind of a goal to achieve at the end. So when you think of game design, you don't have to think that it involves computers all the time, because a lot of games aren't on computers. So you shouldn't feel that if you want to be a game designer, you're limited to hardware. There's a lot of cool board games out there, and for example, like chess, simple game. So you could make a game out of anything basically, and the role of the game designer is to create a challenge for people out of mundane, normal-looking things. You want to try and poke fun at them, get them thinking. There's all kinds of different games that you can make. There's, as you probably all know, strategy games, first-person shooter games, educational games. My background started off in mobile games. I started making games about fish fighting each other in a tank. It was kind of like a Pokemon ripoff, but better, I felt. From there, I progressed into educational games, which is where I met Andrew. We worked at the same company for a bit. And after that, I'm now specializing in VR games. Currently working on a project at the moment called Peaky Blinders, starting next week. So it's going to be quite terrifying, and as an experience just to work in such a massive format. Currently, I'm working for a company called Electric Game Box, and it's not so much a computer game, but it's a room, like the game's projected on the walls, and you can go in and interact with all the visuals on the walls. So it's quite like a non-VR, but also kind of VR style of games. So yeah, I've got quite a broad range of game design theory. Like I know what a 2D game is, how to make a 3D game. And I think the essence, if you want to be a successful designer, is you've got to know a lot about a lot of different types of games. You've got to pick out your favorite types of games as well and understand how they work if you want to start making the games that you want to make as well. So starting out, I'd recommend what you got to first look at what we call, the first thing you got to do is actually get a notebook. Inside this book will be all your ideas. Everything you got to write down goes in here first. So as a game designer, you've got to be writing down your ideas and drawing out a lot of things. That's just has to happen. Without the ability to write down your ideas and communicate them to people, you're not going to be able to tell the developers and the artists what you got to want out of that. So the big part of it is the ability to communicate ideas to people. That being said, you also need to be aware of what we call the game loop. This is the first thing that needs to be decided when you're making any kind of game. So the game loop is basically what do you do in the game? For let's say Mario Brothers, the core loop of that game is jump over things, get to the end of the level. It's that simple. And that 30 seconds of a game loop is going to be repetitive across your whole game. It's going to be the one thing that players are going to do the most. So if it's a boring core loop, then the game is going to be quite, no one's going to want to play it. So simplest is always best with these things. And if you want to improve the game core loop, that's what we call the meta game, or the difficulty curve, if you want. Again, using Mario Brothers, from jumping to get to the end of the level, you add in coins and you add in little Goombas that chase you around. So now you've got a little bit more obstacles. So each level will progressively get more and more difficult. And that's the most basic theory you can put down for any game. And it applies to all games, no matter what game it is. It needs to have that loop that goes around. And these loops can get quite quite detailed. And so you need to add in things. I'm sure you know that there's games out there where you have to monetization, customization of items, loot drops and things like that. Those are all things that you're added on top of the loop later to try and keep the retention, is what we call it, players to keep coming back. This is very relevant in mobile games today, and it's something that you need to understand. So as a game designer, your job is quite intense. Like my day to day is typically writing down game design documents. I'll write a high level version of it. By high level, I mean it's just a few bullet points with explaining the core ideas and features in like maybe 2 or 3 sentences with a couple of pictures chucked in there and here. I send it over to the team. They think about it, and then we take what we like out of that idea and we start filling it out. And by filling it out, I mean it's pages of writing and documentation. I have to be able to design the diagrams to explain what happens when something hits something else. The rules of the game have to all be fleshed out. Then we have to decide how the game's all going to work together, and that's when the developers will start making a prototype, and we'll start seeing if what we actually design on paper is fun at all. Then we take it to, basically that's it. We design it, they build it, I fix it up, and we carry on. So,
hey Dave, let me ask a question really quick, because
sure.
I'm curious about something, and this is something that I think would be really great for people to understand. So when you talked about the game loop earlier, is it correct in then assuming that like sometimes the game loop is a really, really simple idea, like you had said earlier, like jumping on coins, jumping and getting coins. In something like Halo, is your definition of the game loop like shoot bad guys? Is that essentially the core game loop of something like Halo or Call of Duty?
So, well, that's quite a broad question, because Call of Duty and Halo have multiple game modes.
Mm-hmm.
So let's pick a game mode, for example, Call of Duty. The core loop there is to get kills, to get power-ups, to get the advantage and win. That would be it. And I think as a game designer, you need to be able to look at any game and pick out the core loop, the thing that is, because the thing Call of Duty, you play, you die, you play, you die, play, rank up, die, play, rank up, die. That's the loop. It just keeps going and going and going. Halo, I think, because it's a story. I know there was at least a story mode in it. It was a little bit more directed. So the core loop in that would be the same ththing: shoot, kill, don't die.
So in games like today where you have like Fall Guys, in situations where like the little characters are running through it, how would you define the game loop in something like that? Because I think these different elements of the game loop help these students who are all working through their own game design document try to think of their own kind of thing.
So what Andrew's doing here is actually a pretty good exercise to do for yourselves. It's pick a game and then try to work out what the game loop is. I've not actually been asked this question before. So say Fall Guys. So what's that? You're basically running around, avoid objects, get to the end, right? Yeah. Then the secondary layer to that would be, I think you can set traps or knock people about, or you work it out from there. It's that's a really fun game. So yeah, that would be a good. Yeah, that's quite fun. Try another one.
Yeah, no, actually, that's the idea, right? It's like
that is it. Yeah.
Games, like mobile game. Like, what's a popular mobile game? Among Us. How would you define the core loop there? And what would you say is, after thinking of that, like, what element makes you think that this could be a functional game loop or a good game?
So why Fall Guys is a really good example of another game is because there's multiple core loops depending on what your role is in that game. If you're just the average, you're not. I think there's an imposter. If you're an imposter, your game loop is to lie, cheat, steal, basically, and get away with it. But if you're the other side of that team, you have to survive, work out who that imposter is, and survive. So that's a nice dynamic of like a multiplayer type game where there's multiple core loops to different characters. So that's when you start building your more like hardcore games, like your RPGs fall into that, your MMOs fall into that category as well. Look at games like Dota or League of Legends. Each hero character has a different core loop to themselves because a tank character is not going to be the same as a sniper character or an agile character. So that's when you start getting to more like hardcore game design, which those kinds of games take a lot more in terms of resources to develop as well, because you need a lot of people thinking about stuff.
And that would be a game that you'd probably call like a triple A game, right? That's something that Amar had talked about with us earlier, where the design gets just so big and so much storied that it's just like you have to build like these really crazy game loops. Is that right?
True, yes. So certain games, yes, but there have been examples where people like Stardew Valley was made by one guy, and that's like a monumental RPG game made by one guy, multiple loops going on in that. So you can do this kind of stuff by yourself. Where the AAA is obviously the graphics, the people behind the writing, the hundreds of programmers, hundreds of designers as well, everyone working together in different pods, and then there'll be like the game director where they pull it all together at the end. Takes years and years and years of writing. So yeah, that would be essentially it. That would be your AAA level, your products. But so I've been dealing mostly in sort of I design. I'm just usually the only designer, so it's a lot of pressure to make sure that whatever I do make isn't wasted in dev time. Like there's nothing. You could easily get a dev to spend his whole week scripting something that's absolute rubbish, and then it's like, what you can't go back from that. So, we have prototyping phases to prevent that. But yeah, it can happen. I've been lucky enough to not have that happen yet. So it's scary. As a designer, I don't code, so you don't need to know how to code if you're a designer. It's a myth that you have to know how to code. I don't know a string of code, and I've been doing this for like 7 years now, and it's just getting more and more intense. So as a designer, you just got to understand how systems need to work, and it's kind of like if you come up with a character or anything in a game, you just got to ask questions about it. Like, for example, Mario. What happens if he falls into a gap? What happens if he lands on spikes? What happens when he hits a flame ball? Obviously, he dies in all these situations. Like, what happens when he gets a coin? What happens when he gets 100 coins? What happens when he jumps? Just things like that. So you start building up the physics and the behaviors of all of you're creating a world essentially. Every little element has an effect on something else in some way, and these behaviors become the rules, and they will govern the whole experience. And
so one of the things that I remember you guys working on a lot was about building the economy, right? And so, I guess from my standpoint, when I'm thinking about it, a games designer is a person that kind of builds like how the whole world works effectively in whatever situation.
Yeah.
How do you decide how that works, and like what are you using for inspiration?
Okay, so double barrel question, Matt.
It's a big one too, right? It's
the
like
first one.
How do you make great games, man?
So if you're going to have an economy in a game, there's two types of economies. This is more relevant now than it was before, but the first main economy, let's say, is the games economy. So this is more for like you want to buy items or collect something. It's a good part of the story. So you kind of come up with your own currency, maybe, and you just got to decide, well, how much does a lollipop cost in my world? Oh, 1 coin. And then you got to decide how many coins go into your game. How many coins does the player accumulate over an amount of time? Because you don't want him to have too many coins and buy everything in the shop. You only want him to buy one thing at a time, and then he's got to decide. Give your items a value, so that players have to make a decision to decide to buy something over something else. You don't want them to buy anything. So I'm not an economist, but because of game design, I've had to kind of try and work it out. Like, what kind of an economy do I want in these games? It's actually a whole other game designer's job. Some people are only paid just to do the economy, and so in tandem to game design, you can specialize as well. You've got your level designers, you've got your economy designers, you've got your combat design designers. So each facet, and I suppose it's more of AAA, but each facet of the game will have a designer attached to it. So you'll have your gameplay designer, you have your monetization designer, which is the secondary layer to the economy, which is real world currency, which is what all the mobile games do. So it's a bit of a nasty trick. I don't agree with it. I don't think you should have to pay for in-game currency to get other things unless that game is free to pay. which is why I would never pay for a FIFA game, because those games apparently just steal your money. For no, and every year that's a whole other conversation. I will move on. But basically, yeah. So depending what you want to do with your game, if it's a big open world game, you need an economy. You need shops to supply your characters and things like that. And yeah, it can be fun. I mean, it's basically that you're creating your own world, right?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So when you're thinking about like what will make a fun core loop, because all these participants here are going to make their own games, what do you think? How do they go about creating a fun loop?
So, one thing is like you might think it's fun, but other people might not think it's fun. So don't worry that other people don't think it's fun, because I've had games that I thought would be great and completely flopped in one area, but then other groups of people will pick it up. So it's really up to you what you think is going to be a fun game loop, and not to worry too much about what other people think is a good game loop. And once you've come up with what you think is a good game loop, you could try and emulate it, using bits of paper and cardboard or whatever you have lying around, and just just think in your head, okay, what happens when this happens? What happens when that happens? And then, you'll get to something that you think is fun. Another thing is that you've probably seen this core loop somewhere else in a game and not even realized it. And I think as designers, you go and you look at other games' core loops. Sometimes it's not even the main core loop that gets your attention. For example, like it's that fishing game in Zelda that was a side game, but now all of a sudden that's become a whole other thing. So sometimes these mini loops become bigger loops. So I'd say it's find something that you really like in a game, whatever game it is, find your favorite games. And then if you think you can improve that game loop, or you have a better idea than that game loop, then start from there. It can come from anywhere, an idea for a game loop. I've had some strange, I see a water drop falling off a leaf one day. That became a picture dropper game that we made recently. Now it ballooned, actually. It was like, when you hit the water drop and it splats. Now we actually did this. Now we got a game. When you hit this water drop, it's actually a bomb. It pops and all the letters come out the side like a splat, and you got to like hit all the right letters.
Nice.
Yeah, so it can come from anywhere.
I think
it hits you when it hits you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Amar was talking about this as well, for like what it takes to be a good games designer, or at least a games person. From his idea was to say, take inspiration from whatever world you're from, right? Is that if you can find something maybe historically or in books or in your day-to-day life, like, being inspired by something like water falling is amazing, right? It's like if you can make a game just off of that idea. For every person there's an addiction, right? If you think about it, like Candy Crush is a very simple moved block thing. That's it. You move colors, and it's huge, right? It's an incredibly large business that has made, I think, hundreds of millions. So, sometimes it's not about being super sophisticated. It's just being inspired, I guess.
I see a little hand here. Does that mean someone's asking a question?
Yeah, so we got Hamza asking a question. It says, what software do you use in making games? So,
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Software. So the game engine that I use for making games, and the engine is the game world. I use Unity. So that would be the main one. I can use Unreal. Have not used Unreal in a while though. But there's other softwares as well. I've been using Adobe Photoshop a lot, but actually I've moved on to another Photoshop style program called GIMP, which is free, and I highly recommend it if you don't have it. Another game engine I've been playing around a lot in recently is RPG Maker. It's on sale now. At least the older version is. I would recommend the previous one. I think it's NZ is the one.
And I actually made a game. I made a game with that recently, actually.
You should see my game. It's insane. Anyway.
Oh, send it. Send it to me. Send it to me. I would love to see. This is really cool.
Yeah, no. What's nice about that game is that engine is like no code required whatsoever. You can do whatever you want in it. And yeah, I've started making an MMO in that game. Well, not multiplayer, but yeah, that's kind of my first drive into making economies, because I get a lot of people asking me to come in and do the economy for games, and I hate doing economies. I'm not a numbers guy. I'm the guy that designs, the fun stuff, like the running around, the jumping, the action. That's what I want. That's all I want to do in games is the action stuff. So
That's pretty cool.
So careful where you want to specialize. You don't want to get stuck in an area of game design you don't like doing. It can easily happen. So yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, right? Because for a lot of these students, this is one of their first few games that they're making. So when you're thinking about like when you were, a youngin, what would you be thinking about in terms of like how could you get started, and what would you say is something you'd look in somebody who they want to get hired? They'd be like, hey, I want to get hired in the games industry. What would you look for?
What would I look for? I would look for someone that can understands the basic mechanics of a game. It also depends what would be hiring them for, but I would like to see that they've got problem solving etiquette, because sometimes that's probably one of the biggest things, is that the ability to think very creatively and solve something, and to solve it in a very creative way as well. So as a game designer, you want to be always the one that's got the good ideas. You've got to like really sell yourself out as someone that understands games. So I'd look for someone that may have a lot of experience playing a lot of games, but sometimes you meet people that don't play games, but they make games. So if they have an example or examples of all their games that they've made, and I can have a conversation with them about games. Like when I talk to them about the games, I can see straight away that they know what they're talking about. If they look lost, then I know maybe that they need to like brush up on their theory a bit. I think game theory is quite an important one. There's lots of stuff you can read about online about it. Obviously, the best way to do anything with games is to play more games, and then just like make notes of what you liked about those games. So I mean,
what would you recommend from the games theory side? Because I think that's something I've never done any readings into that, and it'd be really cool to kind of understand probably some recommended sources. And obviously, if you don't have the answer right here, right now, it's like, put it in the chat for us later. That'd be amazing.
To be honest, like there's a lot of these books that like game theory explained and all that stuff, and I'll admit I've not read a single one of them. I always felt in my mind, if I was good at something, I'm not going to read that. I've already done that. But I mean, I actually read up stuff online. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of great YouTube videos out there as well. I mean, we live in an age now where there's just so much that you can just look up in your free time. So yeah, I guess you could the researching is actually the most fun part of it. At least when I started out back in the day, way back when, there were no books or schools or anything like that where you could go, or it was never a thing. If anything, if you were in the computer club at school, it wasn't a good sign. But yeah, ironically, it was the right choice. But now today, people wouldn't even bat an eyelid. It's just become part of life. So I believe that kids today are growing up as designers inherently because they play so much of this stuff. They're quite switched on to it, and they know how it works, and it doesn't take much digging around to figure out. And then break it apart, pull it to pieces, and try to put it back together again. Just explore.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really, really tricky for everybody is that when they're thinking about the games industry, they don't know what stuff that they want to do in it, because it's really hard to say, oh, I want to be a games designer or I want to be a coder. When they're obviously really complicated skills to like if you're going to be a coder, you have to spend a lot of time doing research into that. And for people that are to say, hey, I just want to design games and I never want to be a coder, what would a first job look like for that person?
Okay, so in terms of developers, coders, they have the best chance of finding work because developers are always in need. Now, I don't have that option because I can't code. I look at code and I might as well be reading like Egyptian hieroglyphs. I just can't do it. So my choice was to only be a designer. Now, what I've noticed is everyone is a designer, but the thing is only an amount of people will push through that barrier. So for me, at the beginning it was kind of tough. I was competing with a lot of people who had been to game design schools and had been prepared for the future, but basically given everything to them. I didn't have that, so I actually had a friend called Dan, and Dan and I were like, we need to get into this game industry biz. So how are we going to do that? So we're like, well, we figured out we could use Unity. He could do 3D modeling. I could write, and we had another guy who did a code. And three of us, we worked together. We built a game, but it's still online in beta, but it got to a point where we made the game. So when I went to these job interviews, I made a website about it. I had a community. I had to work really hard. I had to actually show these people here in the UK that I could actually make a game and produce something. And yeah, from that it gained some traction, and that is how I got my first job. A company in the UK gave me a call and said, "Hey, we like your stuff. Come over." And after that, it just kind of snowballed, and it's been quite a ride since.
And I think it's important to recognize, guys, that what Dave did there was not just like talk about it. The key element that I think you guys will probably notice from every single person that's been talking has really been around doing something, creating something to show that you have that passion for it. So whether or not you decide to go to uni for it, whether or not you decide to go to a games design school, whether or not you decide to go move to an island in the middle of nowhere and say, hey, I'm going to work remote. All these things are flexible, but it really does depend on like what you create for people to see your skills and your ability. And that's part of why we're doing this games design document as a whole, is because realistically, you can take these documents and show people this is your portfolio. This is you putting together some first iteration to demonstrate, hey, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm going to push this forward. And I think this is why you should hire me, that I'm willing to do this without pay, and I will create things and show that initiative.
So yeah, just to back you up on that, 100%. Whenever I do speak with potential new hires, the first thing I ask that, I don't ask them to show me anything. If they don't show me anything, they don't go anywhere. Every job I've ever had, I've taken my laptop and I've shown people, this is the stuff I've been doing. This is what I do in my spare time. This is what I like doing. And I've passed, or I got every job. It is that. And sometimes when I hire people, I've hired people from, or not hired them, I've interviewed people from, top of the range schools, but they fail to show me anything that they've produced. And it's a shame, but not really, because I don't want to hire people that don't have a passion for this. I want the person that's done all the crazy little doodles and is really into their story. And basically you have to pitch your game ideas to the person who's interviewing you, and just throw in some examples of games they might have played and get them invested in your idea. They'll want you, and that's how it works.
So David says, what would you say makes a game stand out from the rest?
Oh, that's a tough question, because there's so many different games, and a lot of the really good ones stand out for very different reasons. If you look at, say, The Witcher, that stands out because of its graphic fidelity as well as its story. But then you've got games like Fall Guys, which stands out because of its simplicity and its gameplay. Sometimes art can be a wow factor, but then the gameplay sucks, and then it's a bad game. Or vice versa. The gameplay is excellent, the graphics suck, but it's still a success. So I think a game that would stand out for me, it would have to capture my attention for more than 30 seconds, and the next thing it's 3-4 hours later and I'm still trying to get it. It also depends who you're trying to wow. So you'll come to learn me doing game design, what is your target audience? What is what you're going to make? How is that going to stand out to them? It's a broad question, and it's a question that I have to deal with every day, because we're working now. We have to make these games, and I'm told by my boss, oh, it has to stand out. It has to be a 5 on the store. Unbelievable, almost unrealistic expectations. But I don't know what a group of 12-year-olds likes versus a group of 40-year-old moms. That's the demographic. We've got kids to moms. It's mostly family-orientated stuff. So the the games that I've made that stand out are the fun action games, the ones where people move around and do a lot of stuff and jumping around, for me at least. And that's where the scores are going. So I think the answer to that question is that there's no real answer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, because it's like every audience is different, right? So like what inspires people to be excited about one game is not going to make the same audience, work for others. So it's not going to be one specific set answer. I think it's figuring out what people want and being really in tune with that.
I think a big part of game design is you've got to have a vision. You've got to know what that is, and you've got to stick to that no matter what. And I think where a lot of designers fail is they keep adding to that idea. They keep changing it. They don't keep focus of that core mechanic that they wrote down in the beginning. You got to keep that core mechanic. There's another system called pillars, the 4 pillars of game design or whatever you want. But you got to stick to your core idea, and you shouldn't listen to other people when they tell you what they think you should do in your game. I vehemently believe, do not listen to anyone else where they tell you, oh, if it had this, oh, it would be cool if. Just block it out, because it's your game. You know what you want, and you're not making it for them. You got to make it for yourself. And obviously, it's a little bit difficult when you're working with someone else because it's their vision. So when you're working in the real world, you got to follow their vision. You got to make sure that what you're doing is to their vision as well. So you got to keep that in mind. So there's a bit of a double-edged sword. If your game, your vision, their game, their vision. So it's a big difference between what you want to design for yourself versus what you're designing for someone else.
It is a form. I mean, in many ways, it's a kind of like a form of art, right? Because you'll hire an artist to make a piece of art, and you'll be like, hey, do this. I want this, right? They'll set out the big picture, but at the end of the day, the artist still has to make it themselves, right? And that's you. You're the games designer creating something. And it's not like they can just tell you how to do everything, because if they were telling you how to do everything, then why don't they just paint the picture, right? Like, why don't you just do it if you have the answer? So there's a balancing act there.
Yeah, there is also, and not only that, but sometimes you'll get some crazy ideas come down the line, and you feel like there's absolutely no way we can do any of that. So that happens too. Sometimes you get these extremely ambitious clients who'll want, they'll want so much stuff in such a short amount of time that's just impossible to do, and that can be quite frustrating. If that ever happens to you, I recommend you leave that job straight away, because you're not gonna burn your life away working for someone that doesn't have a clear vision themselves or know what they're doing. So you got to be careful for those ones as well, but that's very rare. Andrew knows what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Right. So Farhan says, what makes a job interview in the games industry stand out differently from other industries?
Oh, that's a good question. I like this question. So what's different? So why it's different is because you can't really judge someone's creative idea. There's no real way to say that one person's creativity is better than another person's creativity. It's kind of like saying why this artwork is good versus why this artwork is bad, if that makes sense. So during the interview process, there'll be a bit of a technical side as well, because I see that they want to see that you're at least capable working in the software that you're going to be working in. And from a creative side of things, they're going to see if your creativity is in line with whatever the product is that you're being interviewed for. So I would recommend, if you're going into a job interview, you should look up and research all the stuff they've done, know who they are, so that when they start asking these questions about what do you think you could do for us, you already got the answers. You already know what their product is, and you build up an imaginative idea of what it might be like to work there. So, and why that's different from, say, coding is because coding is straightforward. If you can code, you can code. If you can't, you can't. So it's an easy yes or no. But with game design, there's no easy yes or no. You can't tell someone's design ability until they're actually designing the job that they've been hired for. So the precursor to that is you have to have all your ducks in a row. As they say, you have to have your demo example. If you've got any demos, you've got your GDDs there. If you've won any awards or anything, or talk about yourself in a way where you've achieved something. People love to hear your achievements. What are your most proud moments as a designer? So you got to kind of resell yourself as someone who's got ideas, who can solve the issues that they probably have and fix it. So it's quite a tough sell, but it works. So it's very different. I'd say from other jobs, completely different.
Very nice. So how do you keep yourself motivated to work on your own projects and even those at work at the same time?
To keep myself motivated. Well, I really love what I'm doing at the moment. I'm always terrified when I'm making new things because I'm always like, oh, what is it gonna work? Is it gonna fail? But it hasn't. I just got told now that my latest game that released last or 2 weeks ago is broken records, and so now I'm confident that the next thing I decide will probably be. I hope it's as good, or because I kind of set the bar a bit high. But there's always that. If you're not scared of something, I think then you're not pushing yourself. I think you don't want to be in a place where you're just comfortably designing things. That will never happen in game design, by the way. You can't just idle through this kind of job. It's not like other jobs where you could probably do the bare minimum and get away with it. If you're a designer, if you do the bare minimum, people are going to notice because there's a lot of you're in charge of a whole team of people. So your responsibilities are quite it cascades down. If you forget something, it could be absolute nightmare for the guy at the bottom who's doing all the work. So you got to always, you got to be a team player. You got to be super polite, super friendly. You got to listen to people's ideas. People are always going to come at you with ideas and suggestions, and you can't just say, no, that's a terrible idea. As much as you want to, you got to say, oh, that's a cool idea. Yeah, sure. And then write it down and then forget about it. So there's a lot of you got to deal with people a lot, and you want to be approachable. You want people to come and tell you their ideas. You want to motivate them too, because because a lot of the time the devs will have good ideas, and if it saves me 2 hours of design work, I'll let them do it. I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. Do it. I'd rather have that relationship with my team that I know they've got my back and I've got theirs. And that's a kind of synergy, as I say. You want that in a team. You want everyone to be. I forgot what the question was. I'm just rambling, aren't I?
No, I mean, you're good, honestly, though, right?
Okay.
Because when it comes to talking and dealing with people, that's a big element of the video games industry, right?
Yeah.
Is that people forget, and it's not just working with games. It's about using others to inspire yourself. And so, I'd say what you've said is a very good representation of the balance that you have to strike. In one, you do need to listen to other people in order to work with them and to collaborate and to get good new ideas. But at the same time, you also point out something I think is really important that should not be discredited, is stay true to what your vision is for the game, right? Don't the more that you it's such a delicate balancing act that you can't ping pong ball off of your ideas and go bum 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 bum, right? Your game can't change like that because it has to have consistency. Otherwise, it does start to feel patchwork. But at the same time, you do need to at the same balance the collaborative element so that you can make changes, but without destroying the essence of the game that you've made. So yeah, it's a really tough one. Jill says, how often does crunch happen in game development? How much does it affect the creativity of the devs?
Sure, that's a very relevant question at the moment. I've only worked in one place where there was crunch, and crunch only happens because of bad management and because someone at the top can't follow their vision. Usually it's investors, but usually it's some mad CEO who's keeps coming up with current trends and then telling the team that they need to change things. So at least in my example of crunch was just someone didn't have the idea. They couldn't focus. There was no clear plan. There was clear plan in my mind, but they would change it. So when things change, that's when the crunch happens. Now, crunch can happen for two reasons. One, investors want the money, so you need to get that thing out by a certain date. But the scope of the project is so big, to fit it in that amount of time requires everyone to crunch. And that's horrible. No one wants that. For me now, my new job, there's no crunch. Everyone's pretty sussed. I've got enough experience that I know how to drive a product from beginning to end without having any of those crunches. So, and it does. I've seen what happens to devs during crunch. They're the ones that pay the most because they're the ones working on the weekends. The designer, because I don't code, I don't need to work on the weekend. I only design so much. My pain comes at the end when the game comes together. So for me, during crunch, it's the last few weeks or the few days leading up to the launch, which is where I have to test everything, build everything, make sure everything works. And I'm usually alone in that, and it's painful, but it's not fun. As soon as crunch happens, you don't want to be doing that. You want to avoid that. Thankfully, today, with the way things are going, and the fact that crunch has been made aware of, people are aware of it. They don't want to have crunch. So you get a lot of new benefits and perks. For example, where I'm about to go now to my new job, the hours are much less, and I've got unlimited holidays. And they've made sure that this crunch can never happen. The idea is that they want to balance your work life with your normal life. You don't want to be doing more work than you need to.
Pavel, crunch is when something like all of it comes down to the last minute and everybody's forcing it and they're trying to make it work for a deadline. And it can extend beyond it just depends really on what's happening there. Clara says, are you able to reveal some of the games you've worked on?
Yes. I worked on a game for PlayStation called Radial G. I was a producer on that. I also did it for Google. I've done a few games for another VR company, but they were all kind of like more agency work, so not so much game design work, not game industry, but agency work. So a lot of like corporate stuff for like Mercedes, for Oculus, for Vive, a lot of tech demos. Mostly VR. In terms of mobile stuff, I did stuff with Andrew. I'm still trying to forget that one. That's when I learned about Crunch. So that's Kitty's reading apps. My current games, when the lockdown is over, I'm sure you guys could go and visit where it is, and we'll try and make something happen. Basically, it's these psychedelic adventures where you're stuck inside a psychedelic maze and you've got to do all kinds of puzzles to try and escape, and you've got to bounce balls around and shoot aliens. It's quite fun, but those are like in places you can't play them online. And now my current project I'm working on is for Netflix, for Peaky Blinders, and it's basically a VR experience where I can't tell you more than that at the moment, but that's where I'm going next. Yeah.
Very exciting, dude. I'm super stoked for you. And I think that is going to be an exciting adventure. And I think for everyone, this is kind of like the element where you have so many options out there. Like the games industry can be all kinds of different things. It's not, one set definition. As you see, Dave's got experience in mobile, like VR, and now looking at movie-oriented VR stuff that's real, or TV-oriented. Really, it's really sick. How would a person who's going to university part-time game company be able to work? Would they be able to learn at a game company, be at the university at the same time?
Well, that depends on the university. Some universities will put you into a game design studio just for the experience. You could work it out. I mean, it depends if what you're doing at university is the same as what you want to do in real life. So it would make sense that the university could help you, put you in a place for, I guess, an internship for a while. That would be really, really helpful, because then you kind of start getting like practical experience as well. And I wish there was more of that in the game design courses. I don't know what they're like now, but when I looked into them a few years ago, that they couldn't place me anywhere. There was nowhere to put me. So I was kind of like left on my own to try and figure it out. But I'd never had to balance that, so I wouldn't know. But to do something like that, you would have to, I guess, speak with the university, because I know sometimes universities frown upon that. But if you're working and you're part-time, then I'm sure they can work out hours. I mean, I'd imagine a game design course today could be mostly online, so you could work and then do the course in your own time. But I don't know which university that is. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I think so. And it's part of that same thing that we talked about earlier, right? It's just do the games industry, right? Be the games industry, actually create things. do things that actually show that, you're interested in doing this and creating the opportunities for yourself, because you have to make these opportunities. One of my cousins is a guy who's working for the games industry, but he does it through pixel art, right? His thing is that he wants to create this entire library for games designers and artists and people that are in there to just use the assets that he creates in the video game space. And he just works on it on a daily basis, right? He creates assets, he lists them on his store, and he shares them across the different marketplaces. Your version of how you get involved in the games industry can be a small component without it being, every single day of your life. So maybe you can do games industry part-time, right? Create these games design documents, send them to people like Dave, say, hey, Dave, can you give me some feedback? And don't be afraid to reach out. Like, honestly, I spend a lot of time in my current job, not in the games industry, just reaching out to random people and be like, hey, can you help me with this? And some people don't answer. Yeah, it's life, right? That's normal. But then I get some people who are like, yeah, I'm happy to help out. And right, and they just respond and they get involved and they say, sure, I'll be very happy to mentor you. I'm happy to speak to you and help you figure something out. And you can build really great relationships just because you said, hey, you know what? I'm gonna do it. Let's give it a shot, right? The Nike idea of just do it has a big impact on how successful you are in participating in places where you're creating things.
Very
So,
true.
Dave, we're in our final few minutes before the students have to get on to possibly the next activity. If you had to leave them with a final gem, a piece of information, what would you hit them with about the games industry? Maybe what do you love most about it, or what do you hate most about it? Hit them with that.
Oh, okay. I'd say just stick to your guns, eh? Do what you think is right. Don't let anyone tell you what to do. And as long as it's fun, do it. Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask either. That will get you far as well.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Do you think, one final question from Marito is, do you think gaming industries are more competitive than other industries?
I'd say I think the game industry's got its own kind of level of competitiveness. There's competitiveness between it's more an internal competitiveness because a game is like a book, right? If it's good, it's going to sell. If it's bad, it's not going to sell. So it's so not as competitive as, say, like other companies, I'd imagine. Like advertising, that's like cutthroat competitive. And I've worked in there before, and that's not fun. But game industry, I've had no problems with competitive.
I think everyone, like, when it comes to making something, the industry is as competitive as you want it to be. If you're going to be the top echelons of the best part of the games industry, it's going to be hard. It's going to be cutthroat. No one's going to be sitting around and be like, yeah, it's just really easy to be the best, honestly. Like, no, at no point is that the case, right? So you can choose whatever industry you want to go into, whether it be the art side of it, the music side of it. It's going to be a hustle. Like, if you want it to be, if you want to be good, it's going to be hustle. And I think Dave is one of the hardest working dudes. That, despite what he commented on, like, oh, just work-life balance, I know the dude worked a ton of hours, right? And I know that he's worked a ton of hours in the last job, in all the jobs, because he puts, he cares, and that's one thing, is that you have to care, guys. Any final thoughts before we go? But otherwise, we can wrap it up here and give everyone 2 minutes back to their schedule to maybe make a run to the bathroom before their next work or class thing that you have to do. Anything else from anybody else? Excellent. Dave, thank you so much for being a part of this, and I'm excited to see what everyone creates for the video games for everyone. So all you guys, yes, submit your documents. Dave will be looking at them, and it'll be very fun.
Thank you both. I'm going to stop recording now.
Sounds good. Fantastic. Thank you, Jenna. Appreciate it. Bye, everyone. Be good. Chat later.